Every great era of professional wrestling produces legends, moments, and iconic storylines that you talk about for the rest of your life. But on the other side, every era also produces storylines so bad that they make you question why you even watch wrestling. From dog food to mannequins, from imposters to anonymous general managers, in this video, we're looking at the worst WWE storylines of all time, starting with the Katie Vick saga. Because there's bad, there's embarrassing. And then there's the Katie Vick storyline so uniquely bizarre that it belongs in a league of its own. The year is 2002. WWE is coming off the madness of the Attitude Era and entering the Ruthless Aggression Era. The brand split is fresh. Triple H has just been handed the newly created World Heavyweight Championship on Raw, and Kane is riding alongside Hurricane Helms as one half of the tag team champions. In theory, Triple H versus Kane should have been a big, physical, hard-hitting feud between two powerhouses. Instead, what WWE delivered was one of the weirdest angles in the company's history. It started on the October 7th episode of Raw, when Triple H dropped a name, Katie Vick, and watched Kane freeze in his tracks. The following week, Kane came to the ring to explain. Katie Vick was a friend from his early wrestling days. One night, she'd had too much to drink, and Kane drove her home. Unfortunately, the car crashed, Katie died, and Kane insisted it was an accident. But Triple H had a different story, and a different piece of evidence. On the October 21st edition of Raw, Triple H aired a tape. The tape showed a man wearing a Kane mask climbing into a casket with a mannequin representing Katie Vick's corpse and doing the deed with the mannequin. The segment was filmed in an actual funeral home, with, reportedly, a real wake happening on the other side of a thin wall. It was not announced to the roster beforehand. Jim Ross, one of the most respected voices in wrestling, simply called it an embarrassment. The creative logic, according to Bruce Pritchard, was that Vince McMahon wanted more soap opera elements, deeper character backstories, emotional texture, something audiences could sink into. The intentions were good, but what he got instead was a monstrosity. The angle concluded within weeks, and the Katie Vick name became wrestling shorthand for the moment a creative department completely lost the plot. But there's a post-credit scene that makes the whole thing even more surreal. Tommy Dreamer later revealed that Vince's original plan was to have the feud culminate at WrestleMania, with a man named Scott Vick appearing as Katie's avenging brother to face Triple H. Imagine how bizarre that would have been. But if the Katie Vick storyline was embarrassing, up next, let's talk about perhaps the worst celebrity involvement in the history of Monday Night Raw. Kevin Federline was a backup dancer who had briefly been married to Britney Spears. By late 2006, his marriage had collapsed, his debut rap album had gone nowhere, and he was, in the most literal sense, famous for nothing. WWE looked at all of that and said, "That's our guy." K-Fed showed up on the October 16, 2006 episode of Raw as a guest of Johnny Nitro and Melina. As soon as he started talking, the crowd's response was the sound of thousands of people wondering what they were watching. John Cena's music hit, they got into a war of words, and the segment ended with Cena dumping Nitro out of the ring. However, the story didn't end there. For the next several weeks, Federline orbited Raw like a man who had wandered in off the street and kept getting booked on the show by mistake. He appeared alongside King Booker. He mocked Cena and cost his matches. He made smug faces. The problem was not that Federline was bad at being a heel. The problem was that the whole thing felt like a weird promotional event that didn't belong on Raw in 2006. It culminated on January 1st, 2007, on the first Raw of the year, when Federline met Cena in a no-disqualification match. Cena toyed with him early, tossing him around the ring with the ease you'd expect when the WWE champion faces a backup dancer. And then Umaga hit the ring. He flattened Cena, left him motionless on the canvas, and Kevin Federline crawled over and pinned the WWE champion. The payoff came later that same night, when Cena gave Federline the FU and sent him home for good. Which raised the obvious question. If this was always where it was going to end, why did it take 3 months to get there? And why did the WWE champion have to take a loss along the way? The feud didn't get the mainstream media buzzing, it didn't elevate anyone, the fans didn't care, and the whole thing was just a waste of TV time. But while the K-Fed versus Cena feud was weird, our next feud was straight up trash. There's a version of the Roman Reigns and Baron Corbin feud that could have worked. Corbin had just won the King of the Ring. Reigns was finally in a position to get cheered after coming back from leukemia. An insufferable heel versus a returning babyface would have been simple enough for this program. But what WWE actually delivered was a feud that seemed specifically designed to make every person involved look worse than they started, culminating in one of the worst segments in SmackDown history. The storyline started in October 2019 after the draft placed both men on SmackDown. Corbin, now calling himself King Corbin, immediately began mocking Reigns' Big Dog nickname. He called him a Chihuahua. He brought a man in a big dog costume to the ring. and the crowd showed zero interest in any of it. Then came December 6, 2019. Reigns beat Dolph Ziggler, one of Corbin's associates, on SmackDown. And then Corbin and Ziggler teamed up on Reigns and handcuffed him to the ring post. Corbin and Ziggler then retrieved cans of dog food and emptied them over Reigns' head. The segment was intended to generate massive heel heat for Corbin, but the moment instead landed with a thud. The crowd wasn't outraged on Reigns' behalf, they were just confused about what they were watching. The deeper problem was that by 2019, the crowd's relationship with Roman Reigns was already so complicated that a segment designed to make them feel sympathy for him simply couldn't work the way WWE hoped. Corbin won the TLC match, and WWE ran the idea again when Reigns got his revenge and dumped dog food on Corbin with the Usos. After this, less than a year after being covered in dog food on SmackDown, Roman Reigns returned at SummerSlam, turned heel, aligned with Paul Heyman, and launched what many consider the greatest character run of the modern era. The Tribal Chief transformation was so complete that it made the dog food segment feel like it had happened to a different person entirely, which, in a way, it had. The dog food segment was embarrassing, but at least it was over in 5 minutes. The Bobby Lashley, Lana, and Rusev love triangle, on the other hand, ran for months and somehow kept getting worse every single week. It started in October 2019 when Lana appeared on Raw in the arms of Bobby Lashley, announcing she was leaving Rusev. Rusev, driven mad by his real wife making out with his colleague on national television every Monday, chased Lashley around the show in an increasingly unhinged spiral. Lana accused Rusev of being an addict, she faked a pregnancy, she filed a restraining order, and the commentators had to call all of this out loud with a straight face. WWE in 2019 was truly bizarre. The wedding segment in December took this thing to another level, with Liv Morgan crashing the ceremony to declare she and Lana had been secret lovers, and Rusev bursting out of a cake to attack Lashley. The storyline was sold to everyone involved with the promise of a WrestleMania payoff. Rusev only agreed because he was told the whole thing was building to a match on WWE's biggest stage. However, that match never happened. The angle was quietly dropped. Rusev was released in early 2020, and Lashley eventually pivoted to an MVP alliance that actually got him over. WWE's justification was that they wanted audiences to see Lashley as vulnerable. What they saw instead was some of the worst acting in Raw history. And speaking of bad acting, our next storyline had potential but got ruined by a wig. In mid-2006, Glenn Jacobs, the man behind Kane, was quietly considering retirement. WWE's response was to begin transitioning the character to a younger performer, developmental talent Drew Hankinson, who would later find success as Luke Gallows. The plan was to reveal that Gallows Kane was actually the real Kane, who had been held captive by Jacobs' unmasked version and had returned to reclaim his identity. But the moment they put Gallows in the Kane costume, complete with a synthetic frizzy wig, the whole thing fell apart. The entire angle was scrapped almost immediately. Masked Kane got the win at Vengeance 2006, but then the very next night on Raw, Kane unmasked him, threw him out of the building, and the story was never mentioned again. The imposter went back to developmental, eventually resurfaced as Festus, then Luke Gallows, and found some success. The storyline he left behind is remembered mainly as proof that in WWE, a $30 wig can derail 6 months of creative planning. But while the imposter Kane storyline failed due to poor execution, this next storyline went on for months with no planned payoff. The anonymous Raw GM with the laptop, the annoying notification sound, and Michael Cole reading the emails was one of the most baffling creative decisions in Raw's history. It started when Vince McMahon removed Bret Hart as GM and handed power to a faceless, anonymous figure. For over a year, WWE teased the mystery identity and fans speculated. But none of it led anywhere because, as former writer Kevin Eck later confirmed, that WWE never had any long-term plan for the payoff. Hornswoggle was suggested during a creative meeting as a joke, playing off the already mocked reveal that he was Vince McMahon's illegitimate son. But then the joke became the reality. On the 1000th episode of Raw in July 2012, Hornswoggle emerged as the anonymous GM from under the ring. Over a year of mystery was wasted as a punchline nobody asked for. But while the anonymous Raw GM angle was trash, the Piggy James storyline was straight up insulting. In the October of 2009, Michelle McCool and Layla began publicly mocking Mickie James about her weight, calling her Piggy James. What made the whole situation absurd was that Mickie James was in the best shape of her life. The insults were scripted. The humiliation was not. Laycool force-fed her a pig-shaped cake on a January 2010 episode of SmackDown, then mocked her while she sobbed in the ring. McCool has since said she hated every second of it. She apologized to James backstage every single week before going out to deliver the scripted insults. James herself later admitted she spent weeks wondering whether the company actually thought that about her, whether this was a storyline or a verdict. Mickie won the Women's Championship at the Royal Rumble as the payoff, but lost it back to McCool within a month. 3 months later, WWE released her and sent her belongings back in a trash bag. The Wrestling Observer newsletter gave it the Most Disgusting Promotional Tactic Award for 2009. The irony is that James handled the whole thing with more professionalism than anyone who booked it. But while some bad storylines drag on for months, the Emelina angle managed to be one of the worst storylines in years, while technically never happening at all. Starting October 3, 2016, Raw began airing weekly vignettes with Emma in bikinis on beaches doing slow-motion hair flips. At the end of each one, they promised, "The makeover of Emma to Emelina, premiering soon." The debut was teased for months. The vignettes aired for 17 weeks. Then, in early 2017, Emelina finally walked out. She stood at the top of the ramp, acknowledged the 17-week wait, and announced that she would now be going through the makeover from Emelina back to Emma. And then she disappeared. That was it. That was the whole payoff. According to reports, WWE pulled the plug after repeated rehearsals where producers decided Emma wasn't executing the character the way they envisioned. She was released in November 2017, 7 days after losing to Asuka at TLC. She returned a couple of years later, but was released again. Emelina is the rare WWE disaster that didn't even have the decency to actually exist. But moving on from these modern-era flops, let's go back to the Attitude Era with one of the most baffling reveals of all time. In late 1998, The Undertaker formed the Ministry of Darkness, kidnapped Stephanie McMahon, and terrorized Raw for months. The ministry eventually merged with Shane McMahon's corporation to form the Corporate Ministry and terrorize Austin and Vince McMahon. But then, a new mystery emerged, the Higher Power. The shadowy figure pulling Undertaker's strings behind the scenes. The man behind the man. For weeks, fans speculated. Jake Roberts? Shawn Michaels? Someone new entirely? The buildup was exciting. The Higher Power concept added a layer of intrigue that kept fans locked in through the spring of 1999. And then came the reveal. The robed figure stepped into the ring. The hood was lifted, and there was Vince McMahon, a man who had been feuding with the ministry for months, who had allied with Steve Austin to stop The Undertaker, whose daughter had been kidnapped and nearly forced into a dark wedding. It was him, all along. The crowd groaned because the reveal made no logical sense. Vince had spent months being terrorized by the very faction he apparently controlled. Either Vince was the world's most committed long con artist, or the writing simply hadn't worked backward from the ending. The storyline collapsed within weeks, and all that remained was the meme with Vince's wild eyes. But moving away from these disasters, if you want to revisit the best WWE storyline of every year, check out this video next.